Are you guys tired of people asking you how fast your car is or how much horsepower does it make? Are you tired of people asking you if your car's a twin turbo when it's really an NA and it's kind of slow, regardless of what some of us think? Well, you guys have came to the right place. Today we're going to show you guys how to NATT swap your NA Nissan 300ZX. And we're going to show you guys how and what you need to do so. There's many different ways you can go about this, but what we're showing here is how to boost your high compression NA engine with ethanol, E85, not pump gas. You can, but you're not going to make very much power at all, as you would if you were on E85. Due to high compression, pump gas detonates much easier than ethanol, so you can push ethanol to a higher boost much more safely. If you limit yourself to pump gas, you can get maybe 7 psi, 370 horsepower out of your build, but your biggest problem is to figure out how to control that boost at 7 psi to not blow it up. If you have a good tuner that knows these cars, you can dyno tune NATT on pump gas and get 400 plus horse, because there's a lot more safety measures that you can take with a standalone ECU. Stock ECU, E85 is the way to go. So we're actually going to be pulling the engine out of this car. We've got a lot to do. We have to get this out because we just did a compression test in our last video where we found out the engine in our 95 TT is bad. So we're going to swap an NA TT into this TT and keep it on the road instead of waiting and being at the mercy of these super high priced twin turbo short blocks. That's really not practical right now. Now, the best way to do this as cheaply as possible is just to watch your Facebook groups, Marketplace, eBay, anywhere over time, and look for the cheapest prices that you can find stuff at. I'll try to put either a link or a definitive list in the description of everything that you'll need, or at least everything you need bare bones of TT to put in your NA, minus like boost controller and, supporting mods that are bonus, they're not needed. Here's actually our full TT swap, minus the turbos. I don't think we'll need the turbos. We already have some. So this is all the stuff that you would need to boost. We'll lay it all out in a little bit so you guys know what's what. But now we really need to get started on pulling this engine because, well, it's not even out of the car and we still have a ton of work to do. We're not going to show you a ton on engine removal. I did post a video previously, probably a year and a half ago, how to remove the engine. It might be a little hard to watch. I've grown a lot since then, but it's there if you need an idea. Basically anything that still connects the engine to the car, take it off, engine's coming out. Since I'm pulling this out, if some of you guys did not know, we actually part Z32s. We buy, we sell, we trade, whatever. If you guys need any parts, hit me up through the description. I've got Instagram, I've got Facebook, send me a DM, whatever. We'll get you sorted, we'll see what we got, and maybe we can get you some parts to fix your Z. Enough of the shameless plug, let's get to work. We just got started on the Z. I just got to thinking, to speed this video up a little bit and to get it to where we can show you the good stuff, why don't we just get to where the engine is being pulled. Engine's fully pulled out. Man, do I hate automatic transmissions. I'm just gonna let that be known, as much as I think we all do. I always forget about the hard lines on the trans and I never unbolt it up from the alternator tensioner bracket. And then I'm trying to separate the thing, it won't come apart, I get irritated. And every single time I take these bolts out instead of just taking the bolt out there and separating it. Now that we have everything out, we actually need to pull our flex plate. And we need to find an engine stand. As you can see, we've got a couple over here. We just have to figure out which one we want to take. Probably this one. I like this stand the most. And let's zap this flywheel off so we can actually mount it up. Doesn't look terrible back here. Either it was taken care of or someone actually painted this at some point. I'm going to say that it was taken care of. Motors tend to be in better shape in Infiniti J30s. I don't know why. The car is hideous. Now let's go ahead and just put this thing up on the stand since we were fully ready to do so. Got her up on the stand, and we also just pulled all of our parts out last night, so we'll be ready first thing in the morning. Although it's not everything, we have intercooler piping, intercoolers, turbo exhaust manifolds, turbos, fuel pump, ECU with a socket, turbo oil pan. These are actually JDM downpipes, so you can use your NA test pipes to hook up to them instead of having to buy TT downpipes and test pipes. It's a good little hack you can use. Fuel injectors are subjective to what you want to run, obviously. I get all my chip tunes from Z-Shack when I'm running socketed ECUs. And if I've ever had a problem, they've been quick to work it out and fix it with me. So Couple things not pictured: oil cooler, oil tree, which, speaking of the oil tree, you actually want to grab these if you're running a twin turbo oil tree. Because if you're running the stock twin turbo oil cooler, your feed from your oil tree actually has 2 check valves in it. In the NA, we actually have 2 check valves in the block right here. So I'll show you guys how to remove those, and then you can buy these block off, which are, I think, 5/8 plugs. I'll link those. They're on Z1 last that I picked these up. Now to the fun part. While we're here, we're going to be tearing everything down, resealing everything, and timing it. I usually recommend anyone that does something like this just take on the full job while it's there. This is a pull the motor kind of car, so anytime you have an inconvenience on this motor, you want to pull it. Save yourself the headache instead of fighting with it in the car. Obviously it can be done in car, but when it's out of the car, it's so much easier, and you have so much less stress about scratching the car, let alone are you all hunched over all the time on the car, and that tears my back up. Let's just pull our intake off, our power steering pump, alternator, maybe the crank pulley, and engine mounts. I think, yeah, we already nabbed this side, and that's all pretty self-explanatory. Trust me, while this car is out, you'll be able to learn a lot just by messing around with things, and it never hurts to document what you're working on before, so you have reference afterwards. Now this is why you pull it out. This is such a breeze without being in the car. Cannot remember if I clarified, but this is actually an Infinity J30 motor. And the way you can tell here is the oil dipstick's on the wrong side. There's actually no PTU mount point right here either. That would help. No point in saving any of these. I used to have a big old stack. Learned that lesson. Siren's going off. Must have a big storm coming. I always recommend pulling your engine mounts off just so you get more access to pull off your NA headers. Any bit helps when it comes to pulling these things off, because the bottom side usually aren't that fun to get to. I think there's 2 on each side that's not fun. Help yourself out and spray some of this with some PB Blast or whatever penetrating oil you have or is in your budget. Go figure, like the 4th one to come out with the stud. Now to remove your stud, you actually have to do something called the double nut method. The way you do that is you tighten one nut on about halfway through the threads, at least enough for a whole nother nut to thread on behind it. If you're wondering why is it called the double nut method, it's because you use 2 nuts. Thread the outer one up against the inner one. Put a wrench on it somewhere where you can hold it to turn it, and then you tighten the outer one into the inner one. Now if you got it torqued just right, you should be able to spin that inner nut and pull that stud out. You thread it out. I just noticed something. I'm glad I showed you there. I'm sure you guys may have caught on before I did. Well, this side doesn't need it, because there's literally no way to flip it. So we just pulled that out for no reason. If you look here on this side, you can see there is a thread there. You can definitely see that thread right there. I guess now we're just gonna put all these studs back in. Make sure to also clean your gasket surface and replace your gasket. I always hit it with a razor first and knock it down. You can get it razor finished, but I prefer to go back with a wire brush and really knock it the rest of the way down. I've got my engine tilted, but usually put a rag inside your port, keep it clean, and just clean up all of your contact surfaces and make sure that they're nice and clean. So that way your new gasket will work just as well. Last thing you want is an exhaust leak this deep in. Now we got all of our studs in and torqued down. We're just wiping down our surfaces. Take your exhaust gasket, place it on your studs. You also want to make sure that your mating surface here on your exhaust manifolds is just as clean as your other ones on your head. You need a good contact surface for that gasket to adhere to. Once the manifolds are all shined up, really cleaned up I should say, slide them on, and you can thread all of your hardware on. One washer, one nut. Snug them all down. And then you'll come back with your torque wrench. It's 33 to 37. Don't forget, once you hit your torque spec, make sure to go back and then recheck all the torque on all your studs. Alright, now our exhaust manifold's mounted up. Before we really move on any farther, we're actually going to remove this oil tree. And the reason being, like I mentioned before, we have to replace those check valves with some metal plugs. If you're running a sandwich plate, you don't need to do this if you're running an NA tree. Just started draining the oil and it looks like it's brand new. Look at that. That oil looks pretty nice. Once you get the bolts out, you can knock it loose, or you can pry it outward, wiggle it out. There is a seal inside there, right inside there. Sometimes if those are fresh, it's really hard to get off. It appears someone took it off and decided to use silicone instead of a new gasket. Some people. I'm actually surprised neither one of these check valves are actually damaged. These are what we're pulling out. The way that I pull these out is I poke a flathead in here when I got maybe too big and I break it. And you're just wanting to deform it enough that you can actually pop the ball out. Oh, and it just fell down into the oil pan. Well, it's a good thing we're taking that off so we can find that in there and we'll make sure that we get that out. There's also a spring in here that you want to pull out as well. Now we're going to use a Harbor Freight slide hammer to pull it out. Here's just a little bit of extra light because I just realized my light is not doing too well. This is literally like the $20 slide hammer from Harbor Freight. And this is the attachment I use. It's a 2-pound slide. There's a certain orientation you can get it once you get it in here to kind of get it to grab onto something. That's all you're kind of looking for because there's a lip on this check valve. Got to keep trying until you grab onto something. Ta-da! Right here and this side both are kind of crimped in, so that way you get a little bit to grab it on. Thankfully, one down, but we've got one to go. This one shows it a little bit better, how it's indented on the edge. Once you get them out, just wipe it out. Take your 5/8 plugs, tapered side first, so you can get it to go in. Just push it into place. There you go. Now you're done. Just kidding. You're not actually done. Take something and just tap them in, so that way they kind of seat into the block. I've always just used a 3/8 extension. We've officially bypassed these check valves and it'll officially run through our oil tree, which we actually need to go find. Before we go much farther, I recommend stuffing a rag down here in the oil drain hole. Then hit the rest of this with a wire brush and just clean up the surface before we put a new gasket on. Let's clean it up. Now wipe her down. Now to get the access that you need to your EGR while we're over here doing this other side, we need to remove these water pipes. There's 10 mils down here, 10 mils here, and then there's a 12 mil holding the PCV portion over here. You also have another 10 mil up on top holding the water lines. Remove all of those and then the assembly will come off. Should be able to peel back and twist it off to get it to separate because it tucks kind of behind bolts and stuff. That's the easiest way to get it all off. There we go. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 EGR that I mentioned earlier. Just zap them off. That unit's free. See if we can crack it loose and pull it off. Well, it's a shame I wasn't recording right there. All I did was just pull up on this a little bit and it completely snapped off. EGR Gondo. At least the exhaust manifold's off now. Let's go ahead and give this side the whole one over. Get it all cleaned up, refreshed, and swap these over and put our new turbo manifolds on. Probably clean a little bit of this all up too. Got our driver's side manifold on. I think now is going to be a good time that we try to mount our turbo. There's not a whole lot over here that we need to do, except you will need to pull this plug right here because this is where one of your banjo bolts will go. And you're going to remove this because that is where your turbo oil feed comes from. It'll come along up here, it'll mount behind your motor mount, and then come to your turbo. However, if you're running braided lines that you can get from like Z1 or CZP for like $100, you'll still put something in that place. However, you'll just have a braided line and it'll be a much simpler setup. I recommend this purely because of the price of OEM oil feeds. They're quite on the high side, and if you can spend $100 for braided ones with restrictors built in, I recommend it. So one of the biggest things here for the turbos is the lines themselves. And well, if you have all 4 lines, it's going to be kind of hard to bolt things up the wrong way. The best way to do so is to mount your turbo up first on whichever side it's going to go to. While your turbo's mounted, you can actually bring all your lines over and you can mock them up and kind of get an idea about where they go. So I'm actually not going to show this part, honestly. You guys can use some deductive reasoning here and think. I'm trying to keep the video a little shorter and sweet. This can be like an hour-long video. This could be a 3-hour-long video, but I'm just trying to give you guys an idea of what you need, especially since this is mostly the engine side of things. You also will not mount your turbo oil drains until you get your oil pan on. You can do those later. So here's our driver's side turbo. The driver's side one actually has this longer part that I was mentioning that bolts to the motor mount. We haven't got our oil drain on, but the driver's side has this S-shaped one that goes from one side and out the back. This bolts where your PCV bolts. Actually, it bolts right there instead of up here. And then for the driver's side, your long one that curves around the turbo will actually point towards the front. The passenger side, they're both coming straight up. Any of you guys have watched the channel for a while, our drift car, you know, that's actually got this exact same build and everything done to it. So if you guys want to build something like that, this is literally how you do it. But thankfully I have that to look at for reference, so I could kind of check this. Turbo's ready to mount. Pull this plug. Oh no. Now, once you get that plug out and you're ready to mount your turbo, it's a good time to reinstall your engine mount bracket, which would be this right here. Now, before you get crazy and you go bolting your bottom ones on, you actually need to mount your turbo first, because there is a bolt hole on that oil feed right there. First and foremost, before you mount your turbo, put on a gasket and then you can mount your turbo. There's only about 3 things here you got to get lined up at the same time. Now we're just going to throw one nut on for now to hold it in place, just while we have a second to, you know, reevaluate what we're doing here. So when installing your turbos, you have these lock washers right here. These are really recommended, since these are in such hard to reach areas, that you actually bend these tabs over, so that way the nut cannot spin off due to heat cycles or abuse or whatever. This is really prevalent in drift use, just for any vehicle. So the fact that they have these from factory keeps them from coming off, just ensures you never have to worry about that. 10 of 10, recommend. But we do need a cheaper alternative. These are pretty pricey online. And if you see back here, this line mounts right there. You just have to do a little bit of sliding. Now you install these as a washer before your nut on both sides. I recommend doing the back side to hold it on, and then you can go back and do the front while you try to finagle and get your fingers in there to fit. The back one is the worst by far. Once you have all those tightened up, go back and actually fold over all those flaps to keep your nuts from backing off. It'll take a little bit of persuasion sometimes. Usually a hammer will help significantly. Now we're going to do the same thing over here, but before we do, I want to bring attention right here. Usually there's a plug right here. I think it's a 12mm plug. When you remove that, that's where you get your oil feed for your turbos. From factory, this is the line you use. This line taps into the turbo, sits like this. Then there's actually like a little junction block right here that threads a banjo bolt into there. Now this is why I recommend using the new braided oil feeds, because it eliminates the issue regarding this. You don't have to source that block, just get the braided oil lines, because then they put like a 90-degree elbow there that you can just run and you route your lines so much cleaner. We actually have to put an oil tree on before we mount the turbo, because there's not going to be clearance. This is a twin turbo oil filler tree. If you can see here, that actually has a nipple that you can connect your oil cooler to, which we're going to need because the feed then goes into the oil pan. So we need a source for a feed. So we're going to clean this up, make sure our contact surface is nice and clean because this thing's pretty grimy. It needs cleaned anyways. And we'll use our fresh new Nissan gasket. And literally just put it on, bolt it up. I think it's 12 foot-pounds of torque, and it's as simple as that. Little tree was all refreshed, cleaned it up. We actually took the sensor off, cleaned it up too. And we'll actually let the oil tree soak in some Chem Dip just to kind of loosen everything up. I wasn't too worried about that. But right here it was super caked up. We took care of that. Turns out I actually did find something that we were gonna need. And that would be this block right here for your turbo oil feed. It threads in right here where there's a plug that you remove. And you just really thread it in till you get it tight. About right there, it'll be facing back because your banjo bolt will go straight into it. And here we actually dressed up our turbos with our lines earlier. And you can see this line right here is the one that the banjo bolt goes in. There's a little bit more information online of which banjo bolts to use. I'm currently a little worried I may or may not have them, but I'm not stressing it. Once we pull it out of the other car, we can actually grab those banjo bolts if needed, so we can really just do about everything else right now. But this is the outer side that'll be facing over here, and you'll have two coolant lines just going straight up. So in theory, turbos are ready to mount. There's nothing special over here other than, you know, just going over that block. So we're actually going to go ahead and reinstall the turbo and hook the associated lines up so we can move on to our next step. Now our turbo's all mounted up. We got all of our lock washers flipped down, and we actually just mounted our oil feed right here to this block with a brand new K banjo bolt. Stainless oil feeds. Oh, that's them down there. They look much better than the other one. It's just looped back and around. Just skips that whole block ordeal. As far as turbo water lines, you'll see you've got one back here that's bolted up, and you've got another that comes up here, and you've got two up here. As far as these go, the routing or like line of these at all does not matter when you tie into your heater core pipes back here. You can hook this up to this. You can hook it up to this, which I recommend. It doesn't matter. You can hook this one up to this one, this one, this one, this one. Honestly, if you wanted, if you just wanted to be have it ugly and run lines everywhere, it literally doesn't matter. There's no direct flows. As long as coolant goes in the turbo and out the turbo and has new fresh coolant coming in all the time, it's gonna cool the turbo. I overthought this way too much when I was building this, and I like made a group post and I got seriously harassed. So I have a tendency to overthink, and I'm here to try to clear it up for us overthinkers. These two on the passenger side can go to either one of these. Does not matter. On this side, I'll run from this piece right here, up here behind the pipe, and down to here. This pipe up here, route it up, down, and hook up to that. It's as easy as that. Don't overthink it. Arguably the next step, you could just install your downpipes. Make sure you got a gasket here. OEM is the best. And as you see, the bottom two have studs. You can also put studs on the top. Just make sure you get Inconel ones. They'll last through all the heat cycles, and you don't have to worry about them rusting and breaking. They also sell bolts that are made of Inconel as well, instead of a stud that you actually use from the factory. But I much prefer the stud because it's less likely to break, in my opinion. Since this side has a heat shield and all the lines are bolted up, we can go ahead and install it. Kind of bring this all together. We're going to work on these. These are a given. Two different ones from factory. They're these guys. There is actually a gasket that goes in between. This is the gasket that goes in between there. Just get these bolts nice and snug. They're really thin. You don't want to put a big tight torque spec down, maybe like 5 foot-pounds at most. So be careful and be easy on those. I actually need to go look up the correct orientation before we install these. Also install are these gaskets and these inlet pipes right here. Pipes will all only fit on one way. There's no way of mixing it up. And more than likely this is the correct side. Snug them to 12 foot-pounds as well. Usually your torque spec goes by the size of the bolt. Just like that, because then your accordion pipes will hook up right there on that inlet. Torque to spec. This is the orientation you want to have these outlet pipes. You can see this passenger side is clocked slightly this way, and it's completely flat here and level. Over here on the driver's side, it's kind of like an elbow and it points straight up. This isn't an OEM coupler, so it gets kind of close to this, so we're going to sort that out. And instead of me going buck wild on this thing for this video and doing my timing, valve covers, you know, cleaning it, resealing it, doing all that, I'll do that for the next video. I'm just going to use the rest of this video to cover everything else. So if any of you guys are visual learners, stay tuned for the next video and you will get to see all of this happen and, you know, how to do the rest of this. But just for the sake of this video itself, I want to kind of cover everything just so you get the idea. So now that we got everything hooked up over here, turbo wise, inlet, outlet, even exit for the exhaust, I just want to mention one thing that I recommend if you're here doing all this, please replace your knock sensor sub harness while you're here. Just do it and thank yourself later. Potentially your sensor itself too. Now we're on to the piping portion of things. I've got two examples outside that I can show you guys, as well as how I'm going to mock it up in here, just so you can see kind of both ways, and then you can see where it's placed in the car to know how it's mounted and where it goes. For your accordion hoses, these actually go here on your turbo inlets. So these right here attach to your PCVs, which go right here. Really, they only fit one way, so you just have to test around to see which one's which. So this right here connects to this pipe that's underneath your headlight, which is right here. And then this comes up and connects to the T-piece like this, that then connects to your map. So this port right here on the bottom, on the NAs it's slightly larger. For the twin turbo, it's a little bit smaller so it can fit these recirculation valves. On two of your intercooler piping, you'll actually have mounts right here that will fit and bolt your recirc valves via 12mm. This bolts right here. This right here would go to this, which is your charge pipe, and then this would curl back right here underneath the headlight pipe. I hope that kind of makes sense. And then once they're in the car, it's pretty self-explanatory where these four hoses go, because the two short ones are throttle body to the closest ones, and they're just straight. So let's show you on the car. Now, there's a couple ways you can run these things, obviously. Blow-off valves, recirc valves. I mean, there's different locations for blow-off valves. So your intercooler, which is mounted right here on the side of your frame rail, comes out and comes up. And you can see that's the pipe I was talking about that the recirc valve bolts to. Now the pipe that recirc valve bolts to is actually this pipe right here. And this goes up into this little kind of L-shaped piece, which goes into those couplers in which we just installed. Your other pipes here, they'll usually be bolted like this, and if you have a twin turbo chassis, there are tabs up here to mount this to, but if not, don't worry, because that's why you're here, you're swapping an NA. So this pipe, it runs down the side of the radiator and pops out the bottom of the frame rail down there by the tension rod bracket, which is right here, and then that leads to this intercooler. So usually fitting these is a pain. I definitely recommend doing it while the engine's out. It can be done while the engine's in. It's just a way tighter fit, and you're gonna come into a lot more crunching issues and just hitting different things. Also, as far as the radiator, it can be installed either way. I usually prefer to install it before you put the motor in. It just helps because you can turn it a little bit more to get it into place when the pipes are loose. This dude, it's literally touching on both sides. I still don't understand how guys do 2.5-inch piping. That's crazy. So the same thing over here. This pipe right here on the outside that goes to the outlet of your turbo comes down, has your recirc valve, which its rear hose actually going to that intercooler pipe down here. And you can see here this other fitting is going to the under the headlight pipe that then goes to your mouth. And that's the same pipe that comes down around up here and connects to your accordion hoses. The next kind of thing I want to bring up is the oil pan. If you never change an oil pan, it's not really a big deal. I actually have a video as well. I'll leave tags periodically through this video, but I actually have an oil pan replacement video. You can at least skip to the part where you just reseal it, or wait till next video when we actually do it. But you have your two oil drains each side. The biggest thing is just clean up both your surfaces, Make sure you have both your front and rear seal. You want to make sure that your block mating surface is clean too. I like to go through with a razor first, then go back and knock it down with a wire brush or something while catching debris, making sure it does not enter the motor or the oil pan. I actually use this stuff right here, Nissan liquid gasket. It's pretty much like the Right Stuff by Permatex. It cures really fast. It's honestly hard to believe I've been looking at this pile here, kind of stressing to show you guys what the intake and charge pipe system routing looks like on the Z. Sorry, that was like a tongue twister there. I think I counted one time, there's over 40 clamps or almost 40 clamps on the whole intake system. This thing is the enemy for boost leaks. Boost leak testers are a must for a Z32. If you're running a manual boost controller, you want to mess with this now. You want to make sure both of your vacuum hoses are cut to the same length. Your two references for your boost controller, you'll bring from right here and your wastegate solenoid right there. Tee both of those connections into one another, right here and right here. And after those two are teed together, you will run those to your boost controller. Not sure how well you can see them back there, but I have those teed together. And one side's actually larger than the other. I have them ran right here to the MAC valve. And then the sensor itself and all that, it's actually ran down here through the firewall. If you don't have AC, there's a grommet below that you can run all your wires through for gauges and other assorted things. I also have neglected to mention the oil cooler. From what I understand, you don't actually need an oil cooler if you're not like pushing crazy power, like just a stock 300, 400 horse, because E85 makes it run much cooler. You really want to run a catch can if you have E85 because all of the condensation and the fuel you don't want getting in your oil. So right here for hose, I actually use transmission hose since it's fluid safe. Hoses are supposed to be rated for what they're used for, like coolant, transmission, fluid, oil, or fuel. And at the parts store, they never know what they are. So that's just been the safest bet that I've been able to run. I have no sweating and everything works correctly. Example here of the oil cooler. I've got it hooked up. This first one I'm showing is hooked up to the oil tree. That would be on the part right there that's straight up on the oil cooler. The second hose that's on the 90-degree bend at the top of the oil cooler will run to your oil pan. As far as your ECU goes, you need to have a chipped and socketed ECU that's willing to accept a chip or EPROM for your tune. Really just need to talk with your tuner to know exactly all the info you need. I still recommend Z-Shack for all your chip tunes, although there are other really good vendors in the game. There's also some overhyped and overrated ones. As far as the fuel system goes, we actually have a video on that. However, I think I want to remake that video to be kind of a second option, and when I made that video I was fresh on making YouTube videos, so it's a little cringy to watch, it's hard to follow. I think we'll just update it, and plus we're gonna have to do it anyways when we do this car. So there's a link for that as well. We can get you squared away on how to install a fuel pump. Sorry, it's a little cringy. So that's how you directly wire your fuel pump to get full flow so you can keep up with all your power needs. Honestly, I think that's really about the gist of it all. At most, I can just recommend you guys follow along, subscribe to the channel, stay tuned for the rest or the next couple videos on all this so we get it all assembled, dropped in, hooked up. You guys get the full idea on what to do and how to do it. But for being an intro video and telling you guys, people with mechanical knowledge, they'll be able to figure it out plenty just by this video. Will help you to get your NA making some good power and being a much more enjoyable car. Much more respected as well. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. I think we've covered everything, and I think you guys will be able to figure it out. If you guys liked the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe down below, and stay tuned for more content, and we will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.